Welcome to Effective Bible Teaching Session number 5. In this session, we're going to look at a couple of things. First, we'll look again at the goal indicator statement and how we create those in a way that's appropriate for not only the Bible truth, but for the learner, so the process involved with that. And then from there, we will look at the structure of the teaching plan. So let's begin. In Chapter 8, Table 12, you'll see this table, and this gives us kind of the movement from the exegetical idea to the pedagogical idea, and then to the lesson name, the statement of our learning objective. We start here with studying the Scripture and trying to understand through the inductive Bible study what it is specifically that we're trying to understand, what the central Bible truth is, what did the original author intend for the original listener or readers to understand and know. And we did that through our inductive Bible study. Once we extract that central truth or truths, we then need to present those truths and determine which truths we should teach to our students. So we also have to do a study of our students to determine that. And as you recall, we did a needs assessment of our learners, and the needs assessment helps us understand the needs of the learner and where they are developmentally, physically, emotionally, socially, emotionally, spiritually, and other ways. So when we did our needs assessment, it gave us that information, and now we take that central Bible truth and we begin to tailor it according to the needs of our learner. And so the pedagogical idea is the truth that the teacher of the class wants the students to understand from the passage. And it will be crafted in terms of the needs and the developmental situation of our learners. And then from that we then create the actual statement or statements that describes what's going to happen in the classroom. So these are more general fuzzy statements, these two ideas. And then we need to create an actual statement, and we create one or more of those we call the goal indicator statement. And this is a statement that describes the kind of learning and life change desired or expected in the life of the student as a result of completing this lesson. And we call that our goal indicator statement, and it also is the first thing that we'll create in terms of our teaching plan. Well, the goal indicator statement, as we saw last time, helps us to cross this bridge. As you recall, we looked at how a person learns, and we also know what we want to have happen in the classroom in terms of change. And the way to get from here to there is for us to construct this bridge of our lesson plan. The goals, activities, and tests create our lesson plan. And the first goal we looked at, of course, or the first pillar we looked at was the goal indicator statement. And as you remember, it was a relatively broad statement from the learner's viewpoint. It states the primary learning outcome of knowledge, understanding, attitude, or skill, and it states the subject in a chewable bite. And to that, we added the indicator, which specifically is used to measure what the learner will do to prove learning has taken place. It also tells how well the learner performed whatever that task is and under what conditions. And as we talked about, the indicator statement is essentially a precursor. It's kind of a picture or a template of what the test could be. Because whatever test we do back here will come from this indicator statement here. So they're like bookends, right? The indicator statement and the test should, if they're not exactly the same, they should be very close. Because if we're teaching for that goal indicator, then when we test it at the end, it should be the same thing that we were designing the lesson for. Well, and we also gave you a pattern here. That was the learner will demonstrate the primary learning outcome of or learning concept by indicator, and you had created those based on that template. Okay, so that's a little bit of review. Now we're going to talk about the structure of goals, activities, and tests, and how we're going to put those into a lesson plan structure. Now, the structure we're going to use is going to follow this circle that we saw early on in this semester. These, when we talked about the learning styles presented by Kolb and others, we looked at these 4 different kinds of learners. And the movement from the feeler-watcher to the thinker-watcher, to the thinker-doer to the feeler-doer, the movement down through here is actually the movement from quadrant 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and going around the circle here is what we're going to be, that's the structure of our lesson plan. So we're going to do this in orderly fashion. Now, just as a bit of a just a recall of this model, the perceiving vertical side here, this vertical dimension, is how people take in information best into their consciousness, how they take it in order to deal with it. And the processing is how they actually deal with it. But you got to take it in before you can deal with it. You got to take it in and become aware of it before you can begin to process it and make it your own. We want to make the learning their own. We want them to own it. But two things have to happen. They have to take it in. They have to really, it has to come into their thinking brain so they can begin to think and stew on it. But then they have to process it and understand it. And it's not enough just to be aware of it. You also have to process it. But you can't process it unless you become aware of it. So the two go hand in hand. So we remember that the people on this spectrum here, the vertical spectrum of how people take in information, some take it in better through the sensory, through concrete or real life experiences, and we call those the feelers. They need to actually experience it, and they've got it, and they can now attend to it. While other people can just do it by thinking. They can just listen abstractly. They can listen to a lecture. They can listen to something on the radio. They can read about it, and it comes into their brain, and they can then start thinking about it. The feelers don't like to read. They don't like to listen to lecture. They get lost, and their attention span may be too short, or they just are bored. But the thinkers can sit for hours and listen to a lecture. They can sit and listen to someone talk about the expedition to the Antarctic, whereas a feeler sees, I need to experience it. I need to see it. I need to go feel it. Now, and everyone's on this somewhere on this spectrum, right? On this horizontal spectrum here, this is once you get it in, once you're attending to it, and once you've got it and you can begin to work with it, how do you process it to make it your own? And the watchers are those that can actually just ponder it and think about it. They're very inactive, and they can just can stew over it, and then it becomes the aha moments begin. Aha, got it. I understand it. The doers, though, these are the ones who have to take it and begin to play with it and use it and experiment with it. And once they do that, then they own it. But until they do that, there's still a big question mark about really what it means and how they understand it. So when you put these two dimensions together, you end up with 4 quadrants, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we've named them accordingly: feeler watcher, thinker watcher, etc. Now, the feeler watchers tend to be those who are more of the philosophers in life. Those are the ones and they're the writers. They're the ones that reflect upon life. So they experience life, they go out there, they have their adventures, they experience things, but then they ponder them, they stew over them, they write about them, they kind of squeeze the nectar out of those experiences. These are the Thoreaus and the Emersons in the world. These are the writers in the world who love to experience life and then will ponder and think about them and then and understand them fully that way. In quadrant 2, these are more of your abstract theoreticians and your academics. These are the ones that take in information abstractly through lecture and through books and through study, and then they just sit back and kind of think about it and wonder about it and stew over it and ponder it, and then they get it. And these are the ones that have no problem sitting in a lecture and then reading and just closing their eyes and thinking about it, and they get it and they understand it. It's very, very cognitive, very, very heady thinkers, watchers, and they're very inactive. These are definitely your academic types. Here in quadrant 3, the doer thinker are ones that bring in information abstractly through reading, through lecture, through study, through words and symbols. But then in order for them to get it, they really have got to go out and do it and experiment with it and try it. And these really are the engineers. These are the ones that can go to 4 years of college and get a master's even in engineering, and then they're out there building bridges because they love to get to take that stuff and make it work in real life. So they're the doers. They're not satisfied just sit and think about it. They got to go make it happen, And so they're very much more active in the world with their learning. And then the fourth quadrant are those that bring in information concretely. They like to experience life, they like to experience the world, and then they like to just run out and do it and practice what they've just learned and practice what they've just experienced. They hate the classroom. The academics over here, they love the classroom. These ones hate the classroom. If you hate the classroom, then this is probably you. You're the ones that you want to experience life, and you want to go out there and you want to just do it and make it better, and take what you've learned and make your life even better. So, and bless your heart, those of you here, you sit through lectures like this and you kind of go, oh my gosh, what do I do? But we're all, and by the way, all of these are sitting in our classrooms. All of these are sitting in our churches. And studies have been done to say roughly, a fourth of the population pretty much are distributed evenly around among these four quadrants. So what we're trying to accomplish here is we're trying to go around the circle. What we're trying to do is we're trying to go around the circle here. We start here with 1, go to 2, 3, and 4. And we're going to do some activity that kind of works for the feeler watchers. And then we're going to go and we're going to do something that the thinker watchers love. And then we're going to move to do something the thinker doers will love. And then we'll go and we'll finish with what the feeler doers love. And we'll go all around the circle. And that's where we get the hook, book, look, took. See, the hook, book, look, took idea is the idea that we're trying to hook. First off, we answer this question, why learn this, and we hook the learner by giving them some kind of motivation for learning. The feeler watchers want to know, why is this important? And we're going to hook them with something that is, we call it a learning readiness. It's something that captures their attention and piques their interest. And from there we move into actually looking at what the thing is we're going to talk about. From the learning, from this motivational experience here in the hook, we then transition by allowing that concept that we're going to try to teach to rise to the surface, and we say, this is what we want to talk about. This is what we're going to teach about. And so the hook is a springboard into actually looking at that concept, or that whatever it is that we're trying to teach, the idea. And so then we go to the book, and we say, well, let's define it. This is where we go look at we bring out the authorities, we bring out the texts, we bring out the textbooks and the other information that other people have gathered, and we do our research, and this is where we do the book work here to figure this thing out. And of course academics love that. And then from there we say, now we want you to take this and add something of yourself to it. We want you to begin to think about how this would look in real life, out there in real life, day to day. So the thinker doers are the ones that say, I get it, I understand what this concept is, but now how can I make this something other than just something on the page, something just an idea? How can I bring this into real life? And they begin to plan how to actively and even practice actively experimenting with this concept. And then finally, with the feeler doers, what we do here is the took. By the way, the look is to take a deeper look at it, and it's a personal look too. You add yourself to it. The book over here, this is pretty much impersonal. This is what the book says. Here you're adding yourself to it. And then the took is what they take out of the classroom into the world. And of course we know that the feeler doers like to live their life out there. So whatever it is that they experienced, whatever it is that they've learned and they've looked at, they want to take that into the world and change it or change their life with this concept or learning. So we'll go around here like this. And so the hook, book, look, took will be 4 areas that we'll look, and we'll look even in more depth of what those incorporate. What kind of activities do you do in a hook? What kind of activities do you do in a book and a look? And so we'll look at those in a little more depth. But this is essentially the structure of our lesson plan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a lesson plan, and I have there's a form in your text, but I don't like it as well. I'm going to give you a little better form. And let me bring it up right now so you can actually see it. This is an example of the lesson planning worksheet that you will have access to. And this is similar in form to what you have in your text. I think it's in chapter 9. However, I've made some changes, and you'll see them as we go. So essentially you got just the general information here, the target group and the focus needs. Obviously it comes from your needs assessment. The passage there, the exegetical idea is right here, so you'll put that in as the idea that you got out of the text. And then the pedagogical idea is what you want your learners to learn. That's the big idea for them. And then those give rise to the goal indicator statements. So now I have a cognitive, affective, and behavioral here, and I've got 3 of those. So let's go through these real quick and just so you get a flow of the idea. This is on Matthew 6:25 through 34, which is the passage of seek first the kingdom of God, and the passage talks about don't worry about tomorrow. God feeds the birds of the air. He clothes the trees or the plants, the flowers, etc. So that's the passage. And then the Philippians passage here is don't be anxious for anything, but with prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, etc. And then God will supply your needs. 4:19. Okay, I know. I'm sure you're familiar with those. So the main exegetical idea from the passage is rather than uselessly worrying about their own future, Christ exhorts his followers simply to seek God's reign and character in their own lives. This kind of trust-filled living yields God's perfect care and provision for them. So this is the idea that Jesus was specifically communicating to his apostles, to his disciples. Now we move to the pedagogical idea here. Is in terms of my learners. Now remember, my learners are the young adults. Sorry about that. My young adults in their 20s, and many of them mainly singles. So my young adults have got a need to trust God in their future and their finances. They're young, they don't have a whole lot of money, and they don't not quite sure how to trust God. Well, here, my pedagogical idea, based on my exegetical idea, and based on the needs of my learners, is God cares about us and knows our needs. He wants to provide the best for us. All we have to do is trust and obey. That is the simple, boiled-down version of this exegetical idea in terms of the needs of my learners, is learning how to trust and obey, because God cares and knows. So now the goal indicator statement, I have 3, and these are representative. There could be others, but that the learner cognitive demonstrates understanding of the term seeking God's kingdom and righteousness. Now I chose that particular one because that is key to the passage. The passage is, but don't worry about anything, but seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness. If you do that, everything else falls into place. So that's a key statement, I think, that this learners need to understand, because that's what they're called to do. They're not called to worry, not called to do anything else, but to seek God. So I thought that was a very important term to understand. Okay, a level of understanding. It could be comprehension, it could be application. By defending it, this term, in his or her own words, and giving an example of how it might look in their own life this week. So defining it shows a level of comprehension, and then giving an example of how it might look, that shows another level of application by taking that and applying it in a new situation. Now I also have an affective component here. The learner demonstrates an attitude of thankfulness for God's provision by doing such things as spending time each morning to thank him for his blessings, or by posting a blog or Facebook post that thanks him for his provision. So the idea here is that if they have an attitude of thankfulness, what are the kind of things that they would do? Well, if they're thankful, they'll spend time thanking him. And by the way, if they're thankful, they'll also, if that's a value that is theirs, they'll actually talk that up and share that with others. And that shows that they have a thankful heart by telling others about it. So this idea of posting a blog or Facebook post about God's provision is a way of seeing demonstrated in real life that attitude. And finally here, I have a behavioral, something they can do. The learner demonstrates the skill. Now let me just say an aside here. When we talk about skill, generally we talk about skill as something that's a psychomotor skill, something that you do with your hands that involves your physical body. It could be juggling a ball, a soccer ball, it could be playing an instrument, it could be something that's psychomotor, that's a kinesthetic, bodily kinesthetic function. However, we also talk about skills in a more general sense of some kind of ability that you have to do something. So you could say someone is skilled in accounting. Okay, fine, they've got this ability to do things that other people don't have. That's a skill. Okay, we could talk about it like that. And I think there are some skills in the Christian life that we talk about, things that we can do that are learned behaviors that we can begin to practice, and we call those skills as well. So there's a bit of a confusion sometimes when we talk about skills or hands. It generally in the educational world refers to psychomotor skills, but we're not talking about playing the piano here. We're talking about learning how to juggle. What we're talking about is a some kind of ability that we can practice and get better at in other parts of our lives. So that's why I put kind of skill in quotes, because it is a skill, and the skill in this case is the skill to set aside worry and act on faith. And anybody who's had trouble with that knows that that is something you have to learn how to do, to immediately set aside worry and act in faith by doing such things as submitting worrisome thoughts to the authority of Christ and trusting Him for the results. So it's a little more fuzzy. I'm not completely satisfied with it, but it is a skill that we can begin to practice that relates to this lesson. That as soon as worry and fear come in, we cast it aside, we give it to Christ, and then we trust Him, and we trust Him for our future. So that is a kind of a behavioral skill that we can practice. Okay, so now we move into the actual lesson itself. The hook begins the actual lesson time. Notice that I've added 3 columns here: a time allotted, a description of activity, as well as materials that you need. As you recall, the hook here is, we call it learning readiness, because the hook actually helps the learner become ready to learn. You have to motivate them. You have to give them reason to kind of learn what it is that they're wanting to do. They're just not going to come in ready, willing, and ready to learn. You've got to motivate them. You create some experience. It could be small or it could be large, but some experience that will pique their interest and get them on board to say, well, I'm kind of interested to know more. And so that's why we call it a hook. We hook them so they'll want to learn more. This answers the question, why learn this? And this is particularly for the Feeler Watchers, but it's really for everybody. But the Feeler Watchers love this kind of stuff. Okay, so in this case, I have an article. You can see you actually go to it. It's a pretty interesting article about a homeless man who didn't know he was a millionaire, and he was found dead before he could be told about his fortune. The body of this guy, his name was Mr. Gray, Timothy Gray, the body to air of $300 million was discovered frozen to death under a railroad bridge. I think it was in Wyoming. A really odd article. And what I would do is I would distribute that or show it on the screen, and we read highlights of it. So basically show news article and then read the highlights. What an amazing story. This guy, $3 million error, and he died a homeless man freezing to death in Wyoming because he didn't know. He didn't know. So now a couple things here. I always put a verbatim here of what I would say, or something representative of what I would say. And whenever you write these activities, you use command language as if you are instructing a teacher. So you command the teacher, show, read, ask, say. Okay? So always use command language. In this case, show the news article, read the highlights, ask, what kind of life, ask, say, etc., etc. So this is what I would do. So what kind of life did Mr. Gray live? And they would say, now I always put in parentheses here the kinds of questions I expect to get from my learners. Okay? And I always put those there because if no one says anything, I want to make sure I know what the answers are that I'm expecting from my learners. And if they don't say anything, then I can chime in and say, well, I mean, what kind of life did he live? Anybody? It was poor, right? Homeless? So, but if they start chiming in, then you don't have to say that. But at least this will help you also when you're reading this and as you're creating the lesson plan to remember what kind of answers you're getting for these different kinds of questions. Okay, what kind of life could he have lived? And let them talk about it. Oh, opulent, they could have gotten help, no need, no worries, etc. Ask, if we could go back in time, what could we have done to change his future from what it was to what it could have been? And then you ask them to think about what difference could we have made if we were able to go back in time, and we could have told them about it, we could have put him in touch with the family, we could have gotten him help, etc., etc., etc. And then I focused that response to what one single thing could have made the difference for Mr. Gray. And that might be rhetorical. It seems that had he clearly known who he was and what was in store for him, things would have worked out so very differently. So what I'm focusing down to say who he was and what was in store for him. Now this relates specifically to our lesson, and this has to be a springboard into the lesson. And so now I also added these transition statements here. The transition, how often are we like Mr. Gray? Now this transitions the experience that we've just had here into now, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this idea of God's provision for us and not being like Mr. Gray, right? So the transition, we are like heirs to a fortune. Even now our needs can be met, but sadly we're often living under a bridge racked with worry, wondering how we're going to get by. Our lesson today has a few things to say about God's provision for us. And at some point in that transition, you need to say what the main idea of this lesson is. Today, we're going to learn that God loves us. God has He knows our needs, and He wants to provide for us. Okay? All right, so this transition is really important because it transitions from the learning readiness, the hook, which, by the way, can be very powerful depending on what you do. And you've got to transition now to focus in on the main idea that we're going to the pedagogical idea that we're trying to teach. So now we move into the book. So let's take a look at this thing. Let's take a look at this concept of what we're teaching here, what our lesson is today about. So I've got now also time, by the way, on this time allotted. Step number 2, I've got 3 minutes. Step number 3, I got 10 minutes. And these are estimated times, but I'm trying to keep track of these because I know I only have 30 minutes or 45 minutes. This particular lesson is a 45-minute lesson. I describe the activities here, and then I also make sure that whatever materials I need, I list it right next to it so I can make sure as I'm going through and preparing, I've got everything I need there, and I can go back right before I teach to make sure everything I have everything and everything's in order. Now this book part, remember, as you recall, answers the question, what is this? Tell us the concept here. What are we really looking at? So we go to the book to see what we're trying to learn. And the thinker watcher is the one who loves this the most. So you have your students open the Bible to the passage. You have someone read the passage, or you show it on the screen, and that's again the Matthew 6 passage. And then you say, in order to better understand the passage, there are a few terms we need to define. So now we're getting into the definitions of terms, and the thinker watchers love that. So I show the list of key terms, which are anxious, value, faith, seek kingdom, and seek righteousness. You can see those also right here. All these. And then also I distribute a thesaurus and dictionaries. Now why would I do that? Because I want them to go to the book. I want them to see what the dictionary says, the Bible dictionary says, what the thesaurus says, so they really get a good idea of what these terms mean. Again, this is really, really good for the analytical thinkers out there. And it teaches everybody. And then you say, in small groups, use these resources and others like Bible Hub and Bible Gateway to define these terms. And when you're done, I want you to reread the passage with these definitions in mind, and I want you to call for your insights in a few minutes. So you give them about 10 minutes to go through, define those terms, and then they go back and plug those terms in and reread the passage, and then let them experience now in this those definitions and those heightened definitions, how they bring more life and understanding and depth to the passage. So then, after several minutes, I call for reports to say, okay, so somebody tell me, what word did you find? What's one of the words that you defined, and how did it change the meaning of the passage for you? So someone might read about, don't be anxious for nothing. Well, anxious might mean perpetually uneasy and distracted. And say, yeah, I'm just so distracted with my finances, and I'm always distracted by it, always wondering about it. And it's saying here, don't be always distracted by it. It's like, wow, what a great concept. So I have them go through, and for 4 minutes, I have them give me reports of what they found. And then I go through and I say, well, let's boil these down. I say, so what do you see are the main ideas we understand this passage? And so these are the ones that I came up with, and I'm going to let them give them to me. I'm going to write them on a whiteboard or a large paper pad, and if I don't see one of these that they give me, then I'll add that in. But these are essentially the nutshell points of that passage. And what I want to make sure we get are 7 and 8, because these are the key ones. These are the ones that are actually, I want them to really, really understand, is that God cares for us. He knows He knows all that we are in need of, and we are to strive to establish God's rule in our hearts and lives, and we are to strive to imitate His attitudes and actions in all that we do. These are essentially the definitions right here of seeking the kingdom and seeking righteousness. And I need to make sure they understand that, because that's part of my teaching aim. And now what I could do is I could give a test at this point. I could say, okay, now here's a little piece of paper. Can you define in your own words what it means to seek His kingdom and what it means to seek His righteousness? And I could actually literally test them right now, because as you recall, up here in the cognitive, I want them to define in their own words seeking God's kingdom and righteousness, right? So that is something that I could do. Now, I won't in this particular lesson because I'll do it more informally as I talk and ask for response. But I could do that to actually have them show me that they understand those two concepts. Okay, so after we're done with that, then I move. Basically, I kind of supplement what I'm talking about here for 4 minutes. I'm talking about Philippians 4. Paul reinforced this idea in Philippians 4. If anyone had the right to question God's provision, it was Paul. Blah blah blah. All these bad things happened to him, and yet he said this: "Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need, and thank Him for all He has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything you can understand. And this same God who takes care of me will supply all your needs from His glorious riches, which have been given to us in Christ Jesus." So this beautiful passage is kind of a reinforcement, almost an exclamation point on the end of what we've just learned. Okay, so now we're going to now this is all the book work here, right? So now we're going to move into the look. Now the look answers the question, how does this work in my life? How does this work in real life? How does this work really? Yeah, I know what the Bible says, and I know what the books say, but I need to now figure out how this works. So the thinker-doer, those engineers out there, are going to take, and what we're going to do is we're going to distribute some journals and pencils and paper, and it could be, what I would do is I make a copy of like a monthly, of like a calendar that has a month on it. It's all blank with just the days, or a weekly, or a journal, like, those day runner journals or something like that they can write on. And what I want them to do is say, if we were to follow Paul's example and Christ's command, what would that look like in your week or month ahead? So Paul's example of not worrying and praying and trusting in God, and Christ's command not to worry, but to seek Him and His kingdom. What would that look like? What would that look like? Use this calendar journal to plot out specific steps or actions that you could take when you begin to worry about your future finances or other things. So how can you begin to live this out just on that, and you write on your journal some ideas. Now, and I give an example here to help guide the students. I say, for instance, I usually pay my bills on the 10th of the month. So for me, I could take a few minutes while I'm paying bills to pray over the bills and debts that we have. I could thank God for His provision and tell Him what other needs we have. It's like turning my bill paying into a mini worship time. So for me, on the 10th of the month, I would write in, I will thank God for His provision. I will thank Him for the ability to pay my bills, and I will pray, pray for the needs that we have of the debt or some of the bills we can't pay if we're short that month or whatever, and pray that He would provide. So then I would say, what dates or events can you use as anchors in your week or month to begin to live out the things we've discovered about His provision? What daily actions can you take? Write these down. So I give them about 5 minutes to go through and to, based on my example, write down some of the things in their lives that they can begin to, to write down and to think about. Okay, so now, after 5 minutes goes up, I will have them call for reports. I will call for reports and have them talk to me for a couple of minutes, some of the things we talked about. So what'd you all put down? What'd you put, and allow them to respond. Okay, now I transition because we're going to kind of the end here. This is the takeaway, right? This is the took part. And this is where we actually administer the test or we launch the project. Okay? Now in the case where they're learning something, knowledge or understanding, and say I'm teaching about the books of the Bible and I want them to memorize the books of the Bible, say of the New Testament, well, here's where I would test their knowledge on the New Testament. Or here's where I would test them on that concept they learned in math or whatever. Or even here I could put, define in your own words what it means to seek the kingdom of God and to seek His righteousness. But in this case, we're not going to do that. We're going to actually launch into this kind of basically this personal project that we set up here right ahead. So let me read it here. So what if Mr. Gray had been told about his fortune before he died, but he refused to do anything about it? what good would it have done? The idea of seeking God's kingdom and righteousness means not just knowing the truth, but actually living it out. Seeking is a verb. So, now that's a transition from what we've just talked about in here, and from up here, down to say, and I say this, take your action points with you, and begin to incorporate them in your daily routine. Don't be like poor Mr. Gray, who lived an impoverished life even though he was an heir to a fortune. You know the truth. Now you have to act upon it. And then one last thing here is another one of these things that they can do when they leave. It says, one last thing. What did Paul say should go along with asking for your needs? Now look back in the passage they have to. It says, be anxious for nothing but with prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. So I'm looking for thanksgiving or thanking him. And that goes back to this passage right here. And thank him. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. That's what I'm looking for right there. So I put that answer right down here, thanking him. And I'll keep asking for it until I get it. And then I say, well, as you surrender your worry to Christ and give him your concerns and requests in prayer, don't forget to thank him. In fact, I encourage you to thank him each morning. First thing, even before you know what the day will bring. As soon as the alarm goes off, just say a quick prayer of thanksgiving for another day and for what he will do in your life today. And then I give out these little tent cards, just a small little tent card that says thank him on it. And I say place these tent cards on top or near your alarm clock. It will remind you to give thanks as soon as your eyes are opened. Now, this is, again, something they can do every morning. Now, they might not do it. They take it, they might throw it away. They might even take the card with them. But if they do, and they put it on their nightstand, and they begin to thank God when they wake up in the morning, and they do that, morning after morning, I go back up here to this little behavior right here. The learner demonstrates an attitude of thankfulness for God's provision by doing such things as spending time each morning to thank him for his blessings or by posting a blog. So that this would, if this happens in the life of the learner, then I know that this has happened in their heart, right? So you can kind of see here how we're trying to take these things and we're trying to let them start to live these out in their lives as they go out of the classroom. And that's the takeaway or the took part of this. Okay, now this last area here is evaluation, and this would be how you evaluate the lesson after the lesson is over. So that's your own personal evaluation on the lesson time itself. Okay, not the students, not the not evaluation of the content, but it's evaluation of how you think the time went, how the lesson went. Okay, so that is the teaching guide that we're going to be using, and you'll get a copy of this lesson plan worksheet. I'll give you a Word version of it as well as a PDF version of it, so you can use either one, and that's the format that I'll require in order for the lesson plans that you'll submit. Okay.